Guys, to be honest, all of North America is absolutely suffering in terms of the economy, in terms of immigration. Obviously, Canada less so than the United States of America, but it's basically still the same thing going on up there. Now, if you guys have been following along here, specifically in like world news, you'll realize that Trudeau basically, put out an apology video, for the most part, blaming the citizens of Canada for all types of nefarious things. But like, guys, I think it's honestly time to probably start voting in the interest of your country. And what I mean by that is, if you notice certain areas around the world, let's say, are terrible, then you wouldn't want to actually be there because, let's say, they're crime-ridden, etc. You look at whoever the politician is, and then you start following trends. If you start to notice that other major cities are also ran by the same, let's say, political class, maybe you stop voting for them if you want your actual place to get, slightly better, let's say, guys. And I do think that that's most likely, a voting issue, let's say, these days. But either way, let's jump into it. This is a suggestion via Discord. Name of the video is Why Canada is Collapsing. Nobody can afford to live. It's coming from the channel Moon.
Canada, which used to have the reputation as a welcoming, friendly country, is now one of the most hostile places to live in the developed world.
That's an exaggeration.
Of the people, of course, it's because of the prices.
My bill keeps going up. It doesn't matter how much I try to cut back. It's constantly going up. And I just don't even know what to do about it.
They're ripping us off like they're ripping you off.
I feel like they're all in cahoots.
Over the past few decades, the cost of living in Canada has gone through the roof, propelled by rising costs in housing, groceries, utilities, and pretty much everything else. Meanwhile, wages have stagnated since 2006, while immigration has only increased, and it's led to a wide range of debilitating social issues, like a staggering 20% rise in homelessness since 2018. It's a process that the government has largely let happen and even encouraged in some cases, as we'll find out later. But the reality on the ground is that living in Canada is a question of survival, and for most people, these problems have massive negative impacts on how they live their lives. It's clear from the stats that Canadians are suffering. In the Canadian Social Survey of 2024, nearly half of the respondents said that their budgets couldn't keep up with the rising costs.
Guys, why does it feel like Rome is falling?
Canadian household debt is another indicator of how bad it's gotten. Per citizen, it's the highest in the G7. But what really paints the picture is how Canada's Prime Minister chose to speak to his country and the response he's gotten from his fellow Canadians. Strangely, Trudeau decided that emulating bad YouTube apology videos was the best for his message on immigration. The response was, as you would expect, absolutely terrible, with around 68,000 dislikes and 22,000 likes at the time of this video.
Oh, so it's basically normal.
In the 7-minute long over-polished
for
video,
YouTube apologies,
Trudeau covers the general basics that you'd associate with terrible apology videos. He begins by saying he'll admit his mistakes, even though he doesn't really throughout the video. Then he immediately shifts the blame to bad actors, despite the fact that he implemented the policies which let it all happen.
Increasingly, bad actors like fake colleges and big chain corporations have been exploiting our immigration system for their own interests. So we're doing something major. We're reducing the numbers of immigrants that will come to Canada for the next 3 years.
The biggest fault with his press release, though, lies in the short section where he diagnoses Canada with a labour shortage. While Trudeau himself doesn't go into much detail about why this is apparently the root cause of Canada's problems, the video does use part of an interview with Dennis Darby, a representative for Canadian industry. He says while talking about Canada's industry that, quote, "We've had a chronic shortage of labour over the past decade. It's the #1 issue."
So we think there needs to be more, and you need to continue to push that, push the pedal to the floor to bring more people into Canada.
This moment has become a focal point in the overwhelming negative response to the video. And of course, it
says this video is an example of why YouTube removed the dislike counter. I can imagine.
The top comments are just people that are astounded by how tone deaf the video is.
Why are you telling Canadians
this is like someone who sets fire
fault
to everyone's house in the street, then sits them down for a serious conversation on fire safety. Another lays blame squarely on Trudeau's shoulders, saying, "People are mad because people born and raised in Canada can't afford to live. You've been talking about housing your entire time in office, and yet the problem has only gotten worse." But the video's insinuation that Canada's problems lie with a labour shortage has been particularly highlighted.
Like, guys, I'm almost positive. Like, Canada is definitely bad. The United States of America is bad, but I think Australia is worse, guys.
The video's insinuation that Canada's problems lie with a
in terms of housing
has been particularly highlighted, with lots of comments denying that it's even true, let alone relevant. It's because it shows just how out of touch Trudeau and the establishment have become to regular Canadians' problems. To back up the point, they took interview quotes with CEOs and senior executives on the biggest problems that they're facing instead. All the while, Trudeau is acting like evil corporations are the real problem. while ignoring the fact that he's the one in charge of regulating them. The reality on the ground, though, is that there are plenty of jobs in Canada, but wages have stagnated, so they just don't pay enough to give people good lives, or even keep them out of poverty. The unrelenting cost of living crisis in Canada has been disastrous for the country and its people. No cost is more impactful or substantial than housing, and it means that rising housing costs have been the biggest factor in the entire crisis. So there's no better way to see how bad things have gotten than by looking at Canada's largest city of Toronto and its terrible housing crisis. Before we continue, I want to tell you about our video sponsor. You see, if you're still carrying around a clunky, outdated wallet, it's really time to upgrade with Exeter. Known for inventing the first trackable wallet, Exeter is on a mission to upgrade all your carry. Right now, Exeter is offering up to 55% off using the code MOON.
There you go. If you guys are interested in this wallet, guys, there you go. 55% off. Use this code MOON. All right, let's go forward, guys.
Circle, Canada has quite a low population compared to its massive tracts of land. But even with that relatively low population, a large chunk of those people live in a small collection of large cities, over 73% as of 2021. Canada's population and economy is therefore focused on these large cities. Toronto is the crown jewel, with a population between 6 to 8 million people depending on how you define the city. It's the center of Canada's financial sector, and during their time in power, Trudeau's coalition government have taken advantage of this imbalance to push forward an agenda focused on benefiting the wealthy minority in control of those cities. And it's come at a massive cost to Canada's rural population, but it's also done terrible damage to Canada's urban people as well. A lot of this is because of Canada's descent into a process called financialization. As described by Canada's Centre for Housing Rights, financialization is when housing transforms from something necessary for survival into a speculative financial asset. Regardless of where you live, you'll probably have seen this happen. Over the past 50 years, buying a home has gone from an achievable goal on an average salary to something
nearly
that
impossible.
Only the richest can afford. Meanwhile, investors who got involved in the housing market have seen their assets skyrocket in value. But while all of this is true, it fails to see the larger point. Financialization isn't just housing becoming a financial asset, it's the transformation of a whole society to increase the value of financial assets. Nowhere is this worse than Toronto, a city where financialization has been the cause of more than a 40% increase in home.
Oh, yeah, I've seen like everything is like $1 million for some reason. I mean, I get it, the currency is obviously different, right? But yeah, it's a little crazy.
Prices over the last 5 years alone. But as we'll soon find out, it's also damaged a lot more than just Toronto's housing market. The true cost of Canada's financialization is laid out in the book Critical Dialogues of Urban Governance, Development and Activism. While it's got a wordy title, the actual content is more straightforward than you'd expect. It's basically a collection of essays with some of them describing just how badly financialization has messed up both London and Toronto. Of course, we'll be focusing more on Toronto. As chapter 14 describes, financialization has lots of different causes, but one of the main ones is the relatively recent globalization of finance. Even 50 years ago, your options as an investor were mostly limited to your own country. You could invest in foreign companies pretty easily, but other foreign assets were much harder to get into. But that's all changed, and now if you want to put your money into foreign housing markets like Toronto's, you easily can. Banks have even created ways of storing the assets, which let you buy a share in a fraction of lots of other houses, rather than just one building or home.
Yeah, guys, a lot of people are making money right now through like investment, like REITs and things like that. I'm guessing this is probably kind of the direction we're about to get into right now. But yeah, there is a way, in fact, to invest in foreign markets along with your markets specifically, just by investing in REITs.
Let you buy a share in a fraction of lots of
That's
other
not
houses,
amazing
rather than just one building
context.
or home. It was this process that led to the financial crash of 2008, but it's also changed the very fabric of cities as well. This is where Toronto and Canadian cities as a whole differ from other Western megacities. When the financial markets exploded over the past 50 years and their economic influence increased, Canada was ahead of the curve. Nearly all Western cities' economies have changed their focus from manufacturing to finance and technology. And this changed the cities themselves, as Chapter 9 describes. This has led to rapid gentrification of the inner city, deconversion of many older housing units from rental tenure to owner occupation, and a slow shift of the immigration reception neighborhoods into the suburbs. In English, this means as the city center becomes the place where all the wealth was created and concentrated, the focus of the city naturally shifted as well. Neighborhoods closer to the city got more expensive, and the old residents got pushed out by investors buying up the homes. These old, middle, or lower class homes were then either sold to richer people to live in, or even converted into much more expensive luxury housing. And as the process continued over decades, its effects reached every part of the city. Any neighborhood with good transport links to the center got much more expensive, until housing prices in the whole city went sky high. Working people then only got pushed further further and further out. Toronto, as the financial hub of Canada, saw the worst of this, although similar things have also happened to the rest of Canada's largest cities, as shown in this graph of Canadian housing prices. So far, all of these things we've talked about are pretty universal across developed economies. So what's made it so bad in Canada specifically? Well, the book we've been discussing so far analyzes all of this in greater detail. There's a few different reasons for why Canadians have been hit especially hard. First, Canada's welcoming of foreign investment into the housing market has been disastrous. For example, a report on Vancouver and Victoria's housing markets showed that over 6 billion Canadian dollars have been laundered and invested by multinational criminal organizations.
Guys, I'm gonna be honest here. I'm someone, who absolutely invests in real estate. But I would say though, it would be great if we could put some type of limitation on how many pieces of property you actually could own, how many doors you have, basically. And I definitely would say that these gigantic, large firms should not be able to just buy up an entire neighborhood for nothing.
And that figure will most likely pale in comparison to the so-called legitimate foreign investment as well. It was only a few years ago in 2018 that Toronto started taxing foreign housing market investment above domestic investors.
Okay.
But the problem is also with the policy and the central government. Canada went above and beyond other Western economies in catering to speculative investment in the housing market. Chapter 9 of the book explains how this happened in a few short steps. First, the Canadian government made sure that investors could get credit from the government pretty much risk-free with virtually no interest. The advertised reason for this move was to stimulate the economy with more private investment, but it didn't quite work.
That's not how that works.
Instead, the massive amounts of free credit and easy
free money?
Gold rush for investors.
Guys, keep this in mind. I'm American, right? So, you guys sent me a video on Canada for some reason. We're learning about Canada today, right? But I can only tell you this right now. If you make free money exist in the United States of America, the rich are going to get richer and the poor are going to get much poorer, because what's going to happen is I'm going to go to the bank and say, give me a loan for X amount of money, and then go buy random multifamilies that surround my neighborhood, for example, right? And then that's how that works here. If you make money free, 0% interest, the rich are just going to get incredibly richer. That's it. No more than that. That's it. That's the building blocks to generational poverty.
They started bidding wars for homes, massively increasing the prices. A lot of this investment was focused on rental properties, either so that the rent could then be increased or just to turn them into second homes.
Right.
And this brings us right back to reality and the outstandingly poor rental market in Canada. Let's go over what we've just been talking about. Gentrification and the transformation of cities decreased the supply of rental properties. Foreign investment decreased the supply of rental properties. And finally, the Canadian government's decision to create a housing market feeding frenzy made things even worse. There have been plenty of other factors that we don't really have time to explore here, like Canada's welcoming of short-term lets. The Airbnb market in Canadian cities is absolutely massive, and each one is a home that could have gone to someone who actually lives there. But the results are the same. Regular people have been pushed out of their homes, and barely anyone can afford to live in these cities anymore. Now, to even survive in Toronto, you need to make at least $60,000 a year. Honestly, it's more like $80,000 if you actually want to own any possessions. In the other large cities, it's a little bit better, but that really isn't saying much. So why did they let all of this happen? We can give a pretty simple
taxes
answer based on basic speculation. It's simply the fact that all of this has made a few powerful people filthy rich. The people who control policy are also the people who own lots of assets and benefit from skyrocketing house prices. They don't care what happens to regular people, they'll push the prices as high as they can as long as people still show up to work every day. It's in this way that high housing prices are a symptom of how unequal the economy has become. But high housing prices, and particularly high rental prices, also creates lots of problems for society by themselves. First, there's the direct cost to companies. Commercial rents have shot up along with residential rents, forcing many businesses to close under the pressure. It's a massive factor on its own, but the problem goes deeper than that. Overall, 33% of Canadians rent, but it's much higher in the cities. In Toronto, it's 48%. Quebec City is at 49%, Vancouver is at around 55%, and in Montreal, over 60% of the residents are renting. As the rents in all of those cities have skyrocketed in recent years, wages have also stagnated.
Right,
in fact,
of course they
they've
did.
even gone backwards compared to inflation and the cost of living. You can tell by looking at a stat called real GDP per capita, and it measures how much the average citizen of a country earns adjusted to inflation. So looking at it will tell you how much real buying power the average person really has.
Show it to me.
This is a graph comparing Canada's real GDP per capita to the USA's, and it's not pretty. It's not like people in the US are having a great time, but in Canada it's been getting even worse in the past few years. Now we're at a point where the wage problem has gotten so bad that across the board, Canadians have lower salaries than people from the US. It does
Then in every US, like even Alabama and South Carolina. I'm sorry if you are from Alabama and South Carolina. I didn't mean to disrespect you. I apologize. But even worse than them. Oh my God.
Doesn't matter which state or province you compare. The housing crisis has also played a large role in this. People who are forced to spend over 50% of their paycheck towards rent don't have much disposable income.
Right.
When all you can focus on is surviving, there's not much time for thriving. And this has a knock-on effect on the rest of the economy in a way that's hard to measure on paper. But the results are clear in practice. The nightlife industry has been hit particularly hard.
Yeah, clubs are failing.
Struggles are symptomatic of the wider problem. A report by a research firm called IBIS World showed that over the last 5 years, Canada's nightlife industry contracted by over 4%. The shutdown caused lots of damage, but nightclubs and bars fail to recover afterwards because people just don't have enough money to justify going out very often, if at all. And this is creating a deadly spiral. Rents go up and nightclubs have to charge even more to stay open. And this makes them less attractive to people already paying massive rent bills every month. And
the same thing with like all these restaurants also, and now all these restaurants and other places, they're all using that random machine you tap your card on, right? And then they ask for tips in places that you've never tipped before in your life. And then the salesperson that just handed you the iPad is looking at you like, please tip me. Right? Like that is crazy to me. So yeah, everyone is trying to do, their best to kind of stay afloat in this situation. But bro.
So they get less customers. Less customers, that means they have to charge even more. And it goes on and on until they have to close.
Yep.
This industry has been hit particularly hard because of their unusual clientele. Young people are the most likely to go out, but they're also more likely to be renting and have less income than older people. But we've still seen the same effects across the whole of the Canadian economy. Less disposable income means less consumer spending. Businesses jack up their prices to compensate, and the same deadly spiral comes into effect. Of course, lots of corporations also use the crisis to hike up prices even further,
anyway,
lining their executives and their shareholders' pockets. And the end result,
like if everyone is going broke, right, and everyone is complaining about the income, but yet you raise the prices, and then now you're basically making record number like profits. That's a problem.
The result of all of this is that it just makes life worse. You have to think about it all the time, like making sure you only buy the cheapest versions of food, or even limiting your diet entirely based on what's cheaper. For the people who've been hit the hardest, it becomes a question of which bill you can afford to not pay. Often food is one of the first things you have to give up. Then there's the non-essentials. Things you could only afford as rare luxuries like holidays or meals out at restaurants are now completely off the table. This brings us right back round to Trudeau's YouTube apology about immigration and his assertion that Canada's problem is a labour shortage. This comes as an insult to people who are working as hard as they can but just aren't getting a fair deal from their country for it. Working long hours just to scrape by is easily comparable to the effects that long-term unemployment has on people. You get the same worries with it, like the stress of not knowing whether you'll make it through the next month or how far into the future you can go on for. But at the same time, you still have to work long hours every day. Wages have stagnated for years, prices are still rising, and a third of Canadian renters can't afford their rent. And it's no wonder then that so many people are slipping through the cracks when they're being squeezed this hard. Canada is now on track to have over 500,000 homeless people by 2030. The streets and the shelters are overflowing, and tent cities have become a common sight in most large Canadian cities. And this is particularly awful in Canada, where temperatures drop well below freezing for months at a time. Homelessness and poverty breeds crime and drug use. It might not be long before Canada loses its reputation for beauty and friendliness precisely because its government has been so harsh to its people. Immigration is wrapped up in this as well, and it's another reason the situation in Canada specifically has become so dire. Trudeau and the wider establishment have been happy to facilitate mass migration into Canada for years because it suits their interests. More immigrants means more working people to fill jobs and a more productive economy. At least that's how the theory went, but it fails to consider all the negative effects that immigration has had.
Supply and demand on property, guys. When you start bringing like many people into a specific area, obviously you have to house them somewhere. Now they are themselves competing in the same market as the people who have been living there and paying taxes, right? So what happens is now that piece of property that maybe once was selling for, I don't know Canadian prices, let's say $1,200, okay? Now, because you have 50 people looking at that property, and let's say the property manager, let's say, is going to be charging, I don't know, $40 to $50 for every person that applies. Bro, they don't have to put you in there because they're making the money from the application fees. And then when they get you in there, into the structure itself, it's going to be like $2,000. You have too many people looking for one property. They don't have to give you better prices, bro. Someone is going to pay it.
At least that's how the theory went, but it fails to consider all the negative effects that immigration has had. Nearly everyone who moves to a country either temporarily or permanently is looking for work, but they also need a place to stay, and this only adds fuel to the housing crisis fire. More demand means higher prices, and recent migrants are much more likely to be renting a place than buying it, meaning migration has an outsized effect on the rental market in particular. Crumbling under an overwhelming wave of public opinion, Trudeau has finally announced that Canada will be limiting immigration more for the next few years at least.
We're reducing the numbers of immigrants that will come to Canada for the next 3 years.
For lots of people though, it's a little bit too late. We can be sure that the move definitely has nothing to do with his upcoming re-election campaign and his historically low approval ratings. For a lot of Canadians at this point, any kind of change at the top would be a welcome relief from nearly a decade of the same government. But these long-term problems aren't going to reverse themselves anytime soon, and it could be a long time before Canada can get back on its feet once again.
Okay. I mean, guys, it just feels like Rome is falling. When I mean by Rome, I mean North America, right? Our version of the West over here. Things are getting absolutely unnecessarily expensive. Okay, the housing market is in fact crazy. Prices for property that should not be the prices that they are. Right, these things don't make any sense anymore, bro. The wages are not going up. People's jobs are about to be basically replaced at like what 40 to 50% or so. Specifically, if you do something that's moderately repetitive or you drive for a living, a lot of these things are going to be replaced coming up soon. Right, so it's bad now, but it's going to be bad. It's going to be worse when AI actually has the ability to start doing bigger things like driving and other things that are moderately repetitive or based in education. Guys, that's scary, right? But guys, listen, let me know in the comments what I should be checking out next, guys. Canada. You guys look like you guys are suffering through it up there, guys. For real. I thought Australia was bad. You guys sent me a video on Australia. I was like, whoa. Australia was definitely worse than the United States of America, but I think Canada and the United States of America are probably pretty close in like what's worse, guys. But either way, listen, you guys all have an absolutely amazing day. Enjoy your day thoroughly. This is my lightsaber. Hey guys, you guys subscribe to the other channels? Logical Movie Reviews with Mr. L. Boyd, along with Mr. L. Boyd Music. Oh, also, Mr. L. Boyd Discusses. Guys, check it out. And if you haven't heard it today, you're amazing.